Chapter 11. A Day of Spring. Spring that year came slowly at first, then with a hot rush that turned the valleys once more into furious floods. The snow melted away. Even the deepest sleepers among the grizzlies came quickly out of their winter dens. Marmots again whistled in the basins. The deer and moose grazed and browsed unafraid in the open meadows. Caribou came in long lines from the foothill country. Grouse began to strut. Red squirrels chattered like mad. Canada jays squawked and squabbled. Everything seemed to be moving up higher in the mountains, as if trying to go as far as it could toward the warming sun. The big-horn sheep and the white goats took long journeys to their favorite summer ranges among the higher peaks. The mighty old rams, however, first came humbly down to the valley bottoms to lick the black shale banks where salt and medicinal alkali deposits, relics of the time when all of this land was under the salt seas, filtered to the surface with the seeping moisture. To keep in good health, all of the hoofed creatures had to pay visits to these licks. They wore paths to them from every direction. Moose, deer, and caribou had favorite spots where the mixtures of salt seemed particularly to their liking. The goats had their own chosen licks, the sheep theirs. The more timid the animal, the more cautious it was in approaching these places, but go to them it must. The ewes had made visits during the autumn, but the big rams had been too cautious then to leave the heights. Now the urge to get salt was more than they could withstand. Down the game trails they trooped silently, majestically, each band led by the wisest among them. The wolf pup, black as the ace of spades, lay stretched out on a flat rock, sunning and lazily watching a flock of fine rams crawling along the face of a steep shale bank opposite to him. The rushing water had in past centuries cut a small canyon through the ridges, exposing layer after layer of limestone, shale, slate, and sometimes even coal. In a few places there were masses of fossil seashells. Buckling of the earth's crust long ago had twisted the strata and broken them up so that some stood on end. Others met each other irregularly across cliffs, and the whole rock formation presented a many-colored panorama in which the brown sheep and the black wolf fitted perfectly. Far below them, the grayish, silt-laden water swirled and roared over the boulders. Suddenly the rams threw up their heads and stood still. Then they turned about and began to climb back. At almost the same moment, the long body of a mountain lion rose from its crouching position on a ledge far above. Some trick of the wind had brought the killer's scent to the sheep. The lion trotted along the edge of the canyon, stopping now and then to look over at the rams below, but unwilling to try to reach them on such a dangerously perpendicular cliff. The rams, realizing their advantage, searched out a particularly narrow shelf. As long as they stayed there, they were safe, so the killer, after trying in vain to find good footholds, crouched on a ledge further up and watched. Two ravens saw what was going on, and after talking it over in hoarse croaks, perched hopefully on a stubby spruce to await the outcome. The wolf growled. He had never before seen a mountain lion, yet he took an instant dislike to the creature with stealthy, sneaking tread. When after a time clouds gathered and a spring shower soaked all things, he and the lion both sought shelter, and the sheep took the golden opportunity to regain their safe ridge. But at nightfall, he was still thinking of the big cat and anxious to investigate its tracks and scent. After the rally call to bring Gray back, he led the way down to a fording place across the stream, and soon was studying the ground where the lion had made its stalk. Grayback was also interested in the scent. The two began to trail. They followed into the timber where the cat had made a bed under spruce. From here, the trail was very fresh. Suddenly they came upon the animal itself, crouching over the remains of a doe, evidently killed some days before, and partly covered with leaves and brush to hide it from other marauders. The cat instantly growled evilly and began to lash its tail from side to side. The wolves were taken disagreeably by surprise. To avoid more trouble and to allow the cat plenty of room, they circled, still amicably, but with no pleasant feeling. Then suddenly anger got the better of the big brown animal, and without more warning, it charged Greyback, catching him completely by surprise and rolling him over with two wicked cuffs. There was a roar of fury, and into the fight sprang the black wolf. He landed on the lion and bit down at the base of his heavy neck until, in a wild effort, it rolled partly on its back and raked at his body with his hind feet. He sprang away, then dashed in for a second furious attack. Catching its throat, he tried to shake the creature. It threw him off and sprang on him, wrapping him around with spiked paws and carrying him down with its weight. The two rolled over together in a whirling mass, hit against a tree, then leaped apart. The lion, with ears back, teeth exposed, and a long, drawn-out, snarling screech pouring from its throat, crouched flat, ready for another spring. The wolf stood his ground and gave such rumbling sounds as he alone could muster. Every hair on his back was on end. 2 rows of terrible teeth gleamed whitely. He was panting from rage and exertion. Greyback slunk around them, completely cowed and shaking his head to ease the smart of a badly torn ear. He was a sad sight, particularly as he still limped from the rifle shot. Unwittingly, he turned the scales in favor of his brother. The lion expected a flank attack and lost its nerve when the gray wolf circled to the rear. It leaped to one side and bounded away, but with the black wolf following madly directly back of its tail. Without slackening pace, it leaped onto the trunk of a leaning spruce and climbed out of reach. The wolf stood watching it as it glared and snarled in its safe retreat, then he disdainfully walked away. Greyback was already hastily tearing at the carcass. He had wasted no time. Both wolves fed until full, then moved away a few paces to rest and lick their wounds. A pair of coyotes came to slightly snatch a morsel or two, but they were not disturbed. A gruff cough, however, changed the scene. A grizzly, followed by 3 brown cubs no taller than foxes, had come stalking into the moonlit glade. Her head was held high as she filtered the telltale air through her nostrils. No man scent, but mountain lion, wolf, and coyote plenty. And a deer carcass just ripe enough to be tender. Long she stood there, the cubs restlessly rubbed against her flanks. It was evident that all the other meat-eaters had fed and were in good humor. The grizzly turned toward the cubs with a muttered woof. They understood that they must wait there, and so grouped themselves about the base of a spruce and watched their mother. In case of need, they knew they could go up the trunk in a rush. Their mother's great claws might be dulled by much digging, but theirs were still short and sharp. At the remains of the deer, the bear once more sniffed the air and the ground with utmost caution. She stalked around the carcass, looked again at the 2 wolves, her possible danger signal, listened to the sounds of the woods. Even then she was only half satisfied. Gingerly approaching the deer, she seized a front leg in her teeth and with no visible effort, hauled the heavy carcass as far as the cub's tree. When, however, the youngsters tumbled toward her, she cuffed them back. She wanted to taste the meat first, to test it for possible poison. At length she lay down to chew in comfort, and the youngsters took this as their cue to rush at the bones and play at crunching them. They were milk-fed and cared little about stuffing themselves with tough meat, but they chewed and sucked at the remaining sinews, growled at each other, and fought until thoroughly exhausted they lay down together in a pile to sleep. The mother still worked at the carcass. The wolves had moved away to drink at the river, and then seek a good bed for the coming day. The mountain lion, smelling the old grizzly from afar, did not trouble to take another look at its kill. It started on a fresh hunt. The coyotes, tired of watching the bear eat all the meat they wanted for themselves, drifted away to hunt hares. But the old mother was uneasy, and always watching the shadows. At length, she called the cubs and hurried away, with them closely following. Then out from the forest slowly came the huge form of the haystack grizzly. Without a glance to the right or left, he marched straight to the deer and began to crunch the smaller bones in his jaws just as easily as a boy would break twigs. The marrow was good. He started on the leg and the other larger bones. Soon there was little left. The old fellow had politely waited until the mother had finished, well knowing her temper when the cubs were near. At length, he too ambled off. Then a wolverine sneaked out of the darkness. He chewed at what was left of the hide and carried away the skull. Later, a weasel darted about the place, and when daylight cut through the shadows, the two ravens circled the woods, and noting the picnic ground, dropped down to search hungrily for scraps. When the mountain lion finally came back for a cautious look, the place was bare. The meat-eaters and scavenger animals had done their work. Not a morsel had been wasted, and soon the grass would grow over the spot and hide all signs.